Right, I've made a few trivial mistakes on the portrayal of the local heroes in the borders and their roles in suppressing left-wing union action. I'm going to tell you about the Radical War. I'm just going to read it off Wikipedia until I get to the bottom of the first paragraph. It is shocking. The Radical War, also known as the Scottish Insurrection of 1820, was a week of strikes and unrest, a culmination of radical demands for reform in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, which had become prominent in the early years of the French Revolution, but had been repressed a lot during the long Napoleonic Wars. An economic downturn after the wars brought increasing unrest. Artisan workers, particularly weavers in Scotland, saw action to reform an uncaring government. Gentry, fearing revolutionary honours, recruited militia, and the government deployed an apparatus of spies, informers and agents provocateurs to stamp out the movement. A committee of organisation for forming a provisional government put placards around the streets. Remember, Napoleon never got anywhere near Britain. Put placards around the streets of Glasgow late on Saturday, 1st of April, the Poisson d'Avril Day, to commemorate the religious jokes and the fish being the penis. Everything is twisted into the world owners, who are actually the elite estate owners, as you'll find later on, and the Walter Scott Foundation. A committee of organisation for forming a provisional government put placards around the streets of Glasgow late on Saturday the 1st of April, calling for an immediate national strike. On Monday 3rd of April, work stopped in a wide area of central Scotland. In a swirl of disorderly events, a small group marched towards the Cairn Company Ironworks, that's in Falkirk, where the Justice Secretary now resides, Michael Matheson, to seize weapons. But while stopped at Bonnymuir, they were attacked by hussars, that's heavily armed militias on horses. Another small group from Strathaven marched to meet a rumoured larger force, but were warned of an ambush and dispersed. Militia taking prisoners to Greenock Jail were attacked by local people and the prisoners released. James Wilson of Strathaven was singled out as a leader of the march there, and at Glasgow was executed by hanging, then decapitated. Of those seized by the British Army at Bonnymuir, John Baird and Andrew Hardy were similarly executed at Stirling after making short, defiant speeches. 20 other radicals were sentenced to penal transportation. It became evident that the government agents had actively fomented the unrest to bring radicals into the open. That's the Dirty Wars campaign that we're still fighting, and Greg Hallett has described in great detail, that lead to one war after another and another for every country across the globe. The insurrection was largely forgotten as attention focused on better publicised radical events in England. 2 years later, enthusiasm for the visit of King George IV to Scotland successively boosted loyalist sentiment, ushering in a newfound Scottish national identity. So you've got post-war unrest, and that is a revolutionary war where the troops were sent to Europe to fight against a radical in Europe, and when they come back they find that they are working men and they have no jobs. They have no right to work, they have no right to protest, but they've been fighting on behalf of the elites. And when the elites came out of Europe for their own safety, they ended up making settlements in Melrose and Northampton. Not many people know that, but when I asked the school teacher at Melrose if he knew it, he said yes, and it's on our curriculum. And the man that works in Lord Sainsbury's supermarket from Melrose also knows it. He's confirmed that story. That is elite internment camps for people that were under threat in France and all across Europe, where Napoleon, who was a relative of Louis XIV, a very close relative, was able to cull 600,000 ordinary working men. We've got the proclamation, the strikes and the unrests, the march on Karen, and which is the foundry where my uncle used to work, is the Karen foundry. He's the only person I know who did not take Mrs. Thatcher's opportunity to buy the council home that he lived in. And then the march from Strathaven, prisoners to Greenock, trials and executions, outcome, see also. In the 18th century, handlooms, artisans, shoemakers, smiths and wrights worked to commission, and so could set their own hours of work, often left in time to read and debate what they had read with friends. No CPD on the agenda at that stage. The National Presbyterian Church of Scotland was founded on egalitarian attitudes and the rights of the individual to make principled judgments. So they're left-wingers. And I've told you about the boss at the British Legion and being the lay preacher and being in charge of the commercial operations, being on the Walter Scott Foundation, which culls the people. Can you see how twisted it is? I'm going to show you the rest. I'll just give you the summary figures. They will try and take this down. It's called wikipedia.org, Wiki Radical War. Okay, I got it wrong. I thought this was the Glasgow riots, but the Glasgow riots were later, and that was when the tank commanders were involved. So there's the Tolbooth and the cross where a plaque commemorates Baird and Hardy. 1st to 8th April 1820. Location Western and Central Scotland. Causes: high unemployment, high food prices, unfair working conditions, unresponsive government. Goals: electoral reform. Yet they were looking for a referendum kind of thing. We're still in the pit. More responsive government. Result: dissent quashed by army. Trials for leaders of protests. Glasgow granted representation in Parliament in 1832. Parties to the civil conduct: British government, British Army, Rifle Brigade, 83rd Regiment of Foot, 7th Hussars, 10th Hussars, Samuel Hunter's Glasgow Sharpshooters. Various groups. Committee of Organisation for forming a provisional government. Lead figures: Earl of Liverpool. You've heard the story about Hitler training in Liverpool. You've heard the story of Lord Macartney of Liverpool trading with Muhammad Ali, with the East India Company, and completely dominating India and its prospects for all of its period under suppression by the Crown Templar. Thomas Bradford, Henry Monteith, Samuel Hunter. Non-centralised leadership: John Baird, Andrew Hardy, James Wilson, Duncan Turner, George Kinloch, numerous others. Charged: 88 charged with treason. Many leaders executed. Absolute pardon granted on 10th August 1835, 15 years later. Absolute pardon. Many leaders executed. Let me show you the little bit that catches my eye. Walter Scott is portrayed as a historic and heroic figure. There's plaques to him on almost every wall in my whole hometown. There's the bit about the Lees coming from the south of England. He was let off. Where is the bit about the foundation and Walter Scott's advice to the government? There's the bit on trials and executions, and the numbers that come to the executions are bewildering. James Wilson was hanged and beheaded on 30th August and watched by some 20,000 people. First remarking to the executioner, "Did you ever see such a crowd, Thomas?" When they took the rugby to Glasgow, It was because they could only get 7,000 people into the stadium, and it made it look full, and that added to the atmosphere. Okay. On September, Hardy and Baird were executed in Stirling with a crowd of only 2,000. And you've got a whole list of people getting topped for just the capacity to work and to be free. And there you've got, overlooking the Parliament building in Edinburgh and the Royal Palace at Holyrood, the Radical Road up Salisbury Crags. When people go there now, it's to run for cash for fraudulent charities. My children get dragged into that, even although they live in Dundee. Yeah, everything is a crime against the people. Outcome: the effect of crushing this stage insurrection was to effectively discourage serious radical unrest in Scotland for some time. Lord Melville, that's Stuart's Melville, the school, relatively decent compared to Fettes, the right hand man in Scotland of Lord Liverpool's government. That's the people that launched the Beatles joke. The Jaguar was the nickname of the man who was called Muhammad Ali, which is why Muhammad Ali changed his name from Cassius Clay, feet of clay, to someone who was in the empire upon which the sun would never set. In Scotland, of Lord Liverpool's government saw the suggested visit of King George IV to Scotland as a political need to engage the feelings of the common people and weaken the radical movement. The event, largely organised by Sir Walter Scott, succeeded brilliantly and brought a newfound Scottish national identity, creating widespread enthusiasm for the tartan-plaided pageantry that Sheriff Ranald MacDonald of Stirling was already enthusiastically engaged in as a clan chieftain at Alva and member of various Highland societies. Yet that is beginning to tell you the barren rocks of Aden joke. They put them in the kilts, they march them bravely, beating the drum down the street, and then they send them to Las Vegas under Alistair Hutton's thrall as the boss at the British Legion in my hometown. He's the public speaker on the pictures that I've made in this PowerPoint presentation. It is absolutely sad, and this is them celebrating the transition back to fascism from potentially a balanced society with people on the left wing, people on the right wing, and people in the middle. But no, we cannot have that. Every political party is tied to fascism and is friends of Israel, as Jim Murphy, who was in the front page of the newspapers this morning as the Quisling, who is a friend of Israel and scammed the Clutha pub helicopter crash just to take the attention away from the changes in Scotland and the impending referendum, and to get funds from Levy and McRae, the crooked law company that has allowed Anne Gloag to remove the right to roam from Scottish land. These guys are ever so happy with themselves. This is one of the arrows that was locked up in Edinburgh, where the speculative society thrive and they harbour criminals and have massive funds for the Crown Office for whom he works to cover up the illegitimacy of the Crown and to zap the working man whenever they get the opportunity. Okay, and let me just scroll down. I'll show you what the website looks for that radical organisation. There's the website that I'm reading from. Yeah, and let me just finish that bit on Walter Scott, just in case I miss anything important. Sir Walter Scott succeeded brilliantly and brought a newfound Scottish national identity, creating widespread enthusiasm for the tartan-plaided pageantry. That takes you back to Flodden, everybody gets into the kilt, everybody flies the flag, and they don't give a fuck that they keep culling their relatives. They are able to get drunk on the night of the event in Selkirk to celebrate the massacre of the army and the fact that only 2 people returned. Yeah, and when you hear from Greg Hallett how the wars are run, those 2 people are likely to be very influential in society in the years ahead, because they've been allowed to be in the intel organisation, to be the double agents, to understand why some clans join the other side. Everything stays the same, and the working man dies an impoverished death. At the suggestion of Walter Scott, unemployed weavers from the west of Scotland were put to work on paving a track round Salisbury Crags in Holyrood Park, adjoining Arthur Seat. The path is still known as the Radical Road. So forced labour, as we get post-war, and when the anti-communist cull comes, run by the Prime Minister in various G8 countries, then they see the Radical Road concept as a massive triumph for fascism. Yeah, for fascism. And fascism continues to thrive from the hubs and the people that are identified in this video. Yeah, let me just see if we can find the Glasgow riots now to show you what happened in the return from the World War I. It is shameful, just absolutely shameful. So that was the Radical War, and let me see the Glasgow riots. When I talk to ordinary working men about this, and they are accusing me of being work shy, and you explain to them that they work right beside the plaque on the wall, and you tell them what Walter Scott did, in league with the Abbots for Trust, in league with the people who sacked me on the River Tweed for refusing to kill salmon during the embargo on killing salmon for preservation reasons. Those are lords of the realm, full members, and oft times that Lord Sanderson of Bowden has been the boss at the Walter Scott Foundation. They're all on the Abbots for Trust, which is Walter Scott's house. It's had a massive revamp, and I don't know who's got the treasures inside it now, but Walter Scott was the curator in the rape and pillage of all of the Borders abbeys. That's why his first home was lined with treasures, and he's alleged to have died a bankrupt. I do not believe a word of it. Okay, Glasgow riots 1919, let's have a look at that. So we've seen the Glasgow riots 1819. You can see how they like to have the anniversary, and we're talking about this in 2014. You know what happened in 1914. It was not an accident. And you should go to Wikipedia and have a look at it, and you see the involvement of tank commanders from the south. The strategic decision making involves the Walter Scott Foundation even still, and the bosses at the Metropolitan Police. If you send a tank commander from the local town to suppress the local workers, then you may not get the result you want. The people that are in the speculative society might end up dead in a ditch, and the people that run the vast estates that Anne Gloag now owns might be in a shallow grave, because they are tyrants, and the revolutionaries have not been infiltrated by double agents using the sick methods that I've been talking about over the last couple of days. Battle of George Square. Okay, there are very few images. They are really ashamed of what they do. There's the people getting arrested. I think the executions were over and done with by this stage. So it's called Bloody Friday and Black Friday. The most intense riots in the history of Glasgow took place on Friday the 31st January 1919. The dispute revolved around a campaign for shorter working hours backed by widespread strike action. Clashes between the City of Glasgow police and protesters broke out, leading to the British government sending soldiers and tanks to the city to prevent any further gatherings due to their fear of Bolshevism. I've told you about what happened in France, I've told you about what happened in Italy, and I've told you about the Python jokers laughing about Monte Cassino and the culls, and even the explosion of Vesuvius, because of all of those things happening in the local region. It was described in Glasgow as a socialist revolution by supporters, as had happened in the 1917 Russian Revolution and was occurring in Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire while 40-hour strikes unfolded. That's not the history that I've taught you. In 1917, the American American Supreme Court leaders Untermeyer and Brandeis made sure that World War I would not end at that time, and the Brits, although Germany and the powers to the east had the vast majority of land grabbed by that time, the decision to extend the war beyond 1917 was made entirely for profit, and Hallett has explained all of that, and I've relayed that to you in videos in recent days covered by the titles Greg Hallett and Operation Winnie the Pooh. And what you've got is a strike unfolding so that they could shorten the working hours from 55 hours to 30 and double the number of jobs. This is the folk that fought for their country. They are now the communist menace, and that is the movement that the Catholics in Latin America joined. That's the elite popes and cardinals. The priests tried to help the people. The poor, the parishioners, they were often burnt in the parish church, or later on, when Pinochet was the boss, they were shot in the head in football stadia. Okay, let me just summarise what happened. 31st January 1919, Glasgow, Scotland. Anger with 53-hour working week, unemployment. That's the causes. Goals: reduced working week, reduced unemployment. Methods: strike action, rioting throughout Glasgow, running battles with police. Remember, led by the Met Police from the Peelers in London. Robert Peel is a founder of the Met Police. He is a fascist. He is a Walter Scott Foundation member and a member of the Abbotsford Trust. And the meetings that were held 100 years before the London Olympics in 2012, so it is 1912, were about fascism and the launch of eugenics and the things that we got in the science sector in Germany that sparked all of the ethnic hatred for World War II. Yet it never ends. So methods: strike action, rioting throughout Glasgow, running battles with police. Result: army units deployed to Glasgow. Workers returned to work under guarantee of 47-hour week. How many jobs is that going to create? What they wanted was to double the workforce and to make a sacrifice by reducing their income so that their colleagues who survived the massive cull in the war were able to have a decent prospect and have a life. Like the people in the pinstripe suits that run the draft board. Result: growth of labour movement in Scotland. Parties to the civil conflict: British government, Glasgow Corporation, Glasgow City Police. Protesters and striking workers. Lead figures: Lord Provost Sir James Watson Stewart. That's maybe a relative of Peter Watson who worked for Levy and McRae. The vital importance of law enforcement and legal firms is being driven home in these videos, because I know they know the importance of that, because in the film The Devil's Advocate, Al Pacino emphasises it as he talks to his relatives in the devilish families. Yeah, it is not funny. The world is being split up and people are being dispossessed of their own lands and their own houses by people who are still in league with fascists globally. They are tiny in number and they are protected by your children in the police, in the services and in every sector where the salaries, the pay, the pensions are plummeting into the ground because of the reluctance of law enforcement anywhere across the globe to confront crime, and the reluctance of war crimes investigators to actually reveal who the culprits are, rather than to convict and kill the innocents, like the anti-communist concept. Okay, 60,000 protesters, not all involved in violence, because if you've got a fucking tank staring you down the nose, then you do not want to take aggressive action, as was proved when the demonised Chinese. All of the government is owned by the G8 in other countries in China, and the land grabs in China are massive already. I've told you about Nancy McKinstry's corporate mission. Everything that other people own is to be taken from them. Nobody is allowed to have a democratic future. That is exemplified best of all by the activities in Egypt. The election brings in a new leader, and that new leader just happens to represent Islam, and that is the opportunity for these bastards to take us to world war again. Yeah, that's why people who are innocent and decent need to rally with me, and you need to listen to the videos I've made on Operation Winnie the Pooh. When responsible and mature leaders emerge, the world can be saved. The crimes now involve nuclear weapons, and I've explained to you how the teams were rallied from universities that were immune from bombing in global wars so that they could deliver the nuclear weapon. And it is just about enslaving the whole of the world's people. Medium Mark sea tanks and soldiers at the Glasgow cattle market in the Gallowgate. Can you see the irony in that? It's like the legend of the brindled cow, and people following the cow so that they can see what their future should be. The whole of the world leadership is about keeping the ordinary people in graves, keeping the beautiful wilderness for themselves and their monarchy families, and the people that occupy